In about 6 weeks, the Jets will be heading into a pivotal preseason where they need to figure out what this team is going to look like heading into a big transition season.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks for joining us on tonight's episode as we're looking ahead to preseason and really the season at large for the Jets. Big questions heading into this year. Winnipeg has told us repeatedly they want to win games and compete, but on paper, they're kind of heading for a transition season. I don't really know how the squad can truly expect to compete. They still don't quite have a 100% clear answer on where Hellebuyck plays this season. I know a lot of fans continue to tell me it'll be in Winnipeg. And yeah, I mean, it might be. But, given the whole situation of how he was almost traded a few weeks ago, to at the draft to Buffalo, it's clear that relationship has kind of hit a bit of a snag. And I don't know that this offseason has really produced the kind of results that change a lot of hearts and minds. And that's where I think this preseason is going to be really important. The Jets need to figure out what this team is going to look like and who can actually help raise the ceiling for this squad, because even getting back to what they did in the President's Trophy year did not really get them the kind of playoff results that I think a lot of people thought they were going to have. Listen, right? The Jets had a very solid run in the President's Trophy year, but a lot of that was built on really strong defense and goaltending. I've said this before, but the offense was, in terms of chance creation, a little more middle of the pack. A lot of the goal scoring that year came from the power plays. So at this point, with the Jets maybe not having the best power play and not a lot of scoring punch, you have to improvise and figure out how to get this aging group to create more goal-scoring chances and actual goals. Easier said than done. And people will say, oh, the Jets were one of the better scoring teams last year. And it's like, not really. You look at the actual 5v5 production from this team and where a lot of the goals were coming from, it was kind of like 3 or 4 players. Most of the offense really came from a handful of guys who were basically out on the ice for half the game. The Jets don't really have a lot of support after that, and that is where preseason could be a very big opportunity for the Jets to try and evaluate which of their youth can truly make a difference. We're going to spotlight Björck a little bit later and try and figure out what he can realistically do this season, because that is something that I think the Jets are putting a lot of eggs in one basket for, but I would be a little bit cautious about putting the world's highest expectations on his rookie year. I think he'll be good, but the Jets might be asking too much of him, especially given the amount of offensive struggles the team has had to consistently create the last few years. But in terms of preseason, for me, this team is at a crossroads, and they are still trying to cling to the veteran group as much as they can. They saw that that did not work last year, but I'm not really convinced they actually see it the same way that I think a lot of us do. They got rid of a lot of the players that they signed in the previous summer, and that's fine. You let them go. Some of them probably wished they had not signed that contract, but hey, it was guaranteed money. For Winnipeg, though, they might think that they're going to be faster and younger and better this year, and that it'll be more like the President's Trophy season. And it might be, but you still don't have Ehlers, and you haven't replaced him. You still need a clear out-and-out 2C that can be on the level of, a Lundell of some sort. And again, Björck might get to that point this year, but I think asking him to do that for the majority of the season, that's a tall order for a young rookie, especially a kid who apparently is still finishing high school remotely. So, let's be realistic about what this team's potential is. I've said before, I think this team can kind of flirt with a wild card. But given the roster positions of a lot of the other teams in the Central and how much better Utah has gotten this offseason, it is a lot to ask this Jets group that is kind of barely hanging on in terms of the age bracket to try and push for a deep postseason run. And so the preseason couple of games that the Jets are going to get, as well as like any of the prospect tournament stuff that they do, This has to be the period where they figure out if there is any internal help coming. Now, I think longer term, the answer is yes. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be reinforcements. And I think a lot of the depth positions that the Jets are kind of struggling with will have some really good scoring and play driving ability entering the team. But that doesn't really help you in the immediate competitive window. The Jets still think they've got about a year or two left before they have to probably start talking about pulling the plug on this group. And pulling the plug for them might mean something very different than it means for a lot of other teams. But as far as the Jets are concerned, they very much avoided youth. They're willing to put Björck in this year. They've also talked about Jaeger, but you notice they really haven't talked about a lot of other youth. I know Salamonson certainly has an inside track when he's healthy, but beyond that, does Winnipeg really intend to use that many kids in this team? The answer is probably no. I think a lot of the bottom six will be as it has been the last several years. We know the top line is basically fixed as is. The only changes that they ever make are Iafallo and Velarde being swapped for one another. It has a very clear formula for this team. And I really hope that preseason is an opportunity to try and get the kids to push for spots and maybe give the team leadership something to think about for a shakeup. This team has gotten about as far as it possibly can in the way that it has, and that included a President's Trophy. So that's a major accomplishment. But beyond that, the team still hasn't really busted the playoff hump. Now, their real big task is just getting to the playoffs. It is a crowded field, and a lot of teams have tried to improve this offseason and gotten to a point where they'll probably crowd that mushy middle. It's going to be a real slog for a lot of teams that are more in Winnipeg's position with an aging group and perhaps some uncertainty about the roster composition. The kids will have to have more growing pains. You're going to have some patience with them. And I think with Winnipeg, that hasn't always been the case. We've sort of talked about this before, but I think for preseason, I really need to see the youth drive this conversation. The Jets need to give them the chance to actually make this team and make an impact. And it has to be a meritocracy. If the veterans are really struggling to keep up and keep pace, and it's clear that they're just not really getting the job done, challenge them for their spots. Don't just give it to them because they have the senior veteran experience and you like them. I know in an ideal world, that'd be great, but this team is not in an ideal world anymore. That conversation is past. The Jets had their window. If they want to actually make the postseason, they're going to have to get younger and faster, like a lot of the top teams in the NHL. And I feel like it's very simple to say that, but getting the Jets to actually do this has been like pulling teeth the last several years. And ultimately, what has happened to the Jets is that they can make the playoffs all they want. They even won a round against the Blues, who were, a surprise wild card. But, in terms of actually sustaining a lot of quality play against some of these better teams in the postseason, the Jets have definitely looked outclassed in a lot of these series. I think the Stars series was probably one of their closest, and that one was over relatively shortly. So for Winnipeg, this is a crucial evaluation period. They have got to figure out and see if they can come up with some sort of new top nine combination that makes them a lot harder to play against. This team has, I think for me, lacked a little bit of an identity recently, especially since the Bone departure. The Bones era was predictable in some ways, and I think it went about as well as it possibly could have. But there was definitely a clear kind of message and identity that his leadership sent, and I think we've been looking for that ever since. I don't know that they're going to find it in preseason, but I do hope that they start laying the groundwork for figuring out what this team is going to be heading into the future of Jets hockey. Speaking of future of Jets hockey, what is fair to expect from Viggo Björck this season? I want to talk through that coming right up. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them work together. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, everything works together, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of managing software. The best organizations know that talent alone isn't enough to get you across the line. It's about having everyone on the same page working towards the same goal. And that's true in sports just as it is in business. The Jets have made a really concerted effort with a lot of their promotional materials, a lot of community nights, and fan outreach efforts to try and get everyone working together towards a more fun experience. And it seems like a lot of that has paid off. I mean, in terms of the family ticket packages and stuff, there seems to be some real positive buzz about some of the value the Jets have delivered. But that took some real effort to try and get that package up and rolling. Great organizations win because operations matter. And if you want to be like the Jets, that's why you should get Odoo. Try for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as I want to talk through Viggo Björck's opening year. I have hyped this kid to the moon and back, and I will still do that. But I also want to say that, the Jets are asking him to be most likely the 2 seed this season, and that is a very tall order. For as high as I am on him, and as much as I really think he is, one of the future faces of the franchise, we also have to give him some grace, right? This is a young kid, a literal teenager entering a league that has only gotten harder. And, we really haven't seen a lot of young teenagers and even early 20s hit the NHL and be immediately successful. Matt Schaefer is like an extreme example of, a case study who has really just soared beyond belief. But those kinds of players are very few and far between these days. It feels like the McDavid era kind of set an expectation that guys would come into the league, like Matthews and Laine, and immediately have NHL success. What we've actually seen for like the last 10 or so years has kind of been the opposite. It is a grind. And for a lot of the kids, there is a very, very big learning curve. I think COVID had a really big impact on the development of a lot of these young players. There was kind of a generation that sort of got lost in the mire. And now we're sort of on the other side of that to a point. But I think what we have definitely seen along with that development snafu, so to speak, is that the league itself has just gotten to a point where the skill barrier is super high. The level of competition is super high. And because you have so many teams trying to split a fairly limited pool of talent, it means that there's not that many elite teams and a lot of mushy middle and not many opportunities for guys to have a ton of support to really take flight. A lot is being asked of the existing rosters. And I think for Björck, the amount of responsibility that's going to be on his shoulders coming into camp and preseason and the overall upcoming year, it might be a little bit too much to ask of him right away. The Jets may put him more in a bottom 6 deployment, depending on how his preseason goes, at least just to start for the first couple of games. Maybe they'll promote him up quickly, or maybe they just outright start with him at 2C. But I think asking him to be the franchise savior immediately and to be the piece that helps get the team back into a real playoff position, that is a lot to put on his shoulders. Realistically, this year, I'd be thrilled if he had like a 40-point season and was like a 52, 53% shot share kind of player. I really am not asking him to set the world on fire. That would be a big improvement for the team if they had a center putting up those kind of numbers behind Scheifele. And I know it doesn't sound that impressive, but remember, he's a teenager. This is a pro men's league at an elite level, the highest level of competition outside of the Olympics you can get. And that would be a really, really respectable season. We didn't have that many players last year above 35 or 40 points. It was really just a handful of guys, plus a lot of distributed, assists and secondary points that if you filter for it, you realize the Jets did not have that much primary scoring power. And so Björck is going to change that. And what I do hope that he also is able to do is to elevate the guys around him. But we're not even sure who one of his wingers is going to be. I'm fairly certain Perfetti will be one of them, but after that, I really don't have a good sense of who the other flanking guy is going to be. Are the Jets going to put Iafallo up there? I kind of hope not. I like Iafallo, and I think he's a fun player, but we've kind of seen his offense crater a bit, and age might be starting to catch up with him. Velarde would make a lot of sense, but we know that CSV is probably going to be the Jets' first line. In terms of other wing options, you've got the uncertain Lambert, which could be really fun. I like Lambert, and I think he's got some NHL skill, but I don't know that I would put him in that position immediately, right? Isak Rosén for me would be the selection, and I think the Jets look at him more as a bottom six player. And so you start running down this list, and you realize the Jets just, to be honest, they might go with like an aging veteran, like an Nemesnikov or something. Maybe they put Barron up there. Barron, I think, would be all right. That's not a problem. But in terms of how much offense you're realistically going to see from the second line, I think you need to measure expectations to start. And the Jets would be wise to do so and acquire somebody if they're really trying to win a lot of games. But outside of that, I just don't really see how the year is going to be saved by just one teenager. I think the world of Björck, and I think he is a lottery-level player. But again, the learning curve and how the NHL is this year, on top of the Jets not really having a lot behind Björck and their top young or top aging stars, it just puts a lot of pressure on him. And I feel like the Jets are asking the world of a young kid who hasn't even played in North America yet. So is it realistic? I don't think so. And I think the Jets really do need to try and lure at least a bigger fish like Tolvanen or something to the team. Even a bunting would be helpful for a short-term interim solution. And we all know how free agency is for the Jets. Not the easiest sell, for a team like this. Maybe they can acquire somebody in a trade. If Shane Wright is willing to make a scenery change and comes to the Jets, I think he would be a smart sort of buy lower addition. I don't think he's going to be cheap, and what the Kraken may want for him might not be something the Jets want to give up, but that could be the kind of gamble the team takes to give this squad some more upside and some more NHL talent to work with. Wright has his own issues, and I don't think his future is ever going to be quite as lofty as a lot of people were hoping, but he's still a darn good player. He plays a really solid role, and he would have the sort of skill and upside that I think would pair well with this Jets top nine, right? Like, the team can't really afford to be that picky anyways. We're kind of working with limited options right now, but if you target a player in that sort of position, that could give the Jets the help that they need. Maybe a Kent Johnson, if the Blue Jackets were ever willing to give him up, could be another decision to make. But yeah, asking Björck to be the franchise savior in year one, I just think that is putting him in a position not to fail, but just asking a little too much. The team needs to create a supportive environment and make sure that when they're bringing these kids in, they are giving them a good foundation to work with. I think the last thing we want to see is what's happened with Bedard, where the Hawks drafted one of the most talented players of his generation and basically gave him like toothpicks to work with. Kurashev was one of his most talented line mates, and right now Kurashev at the age of 26 is unemployed. So realistically, the Jets need to give this team a real spine and some backbone. I think Björck will bring a lot, and I'm excited for him this year. But if the team is asking him to be the guy to elevate the squad to true playoff competitiveness in his rookie season, I think that could be a real problem for this team. The NHL is something where, and people don't talk about this, but it's about like risk mitigation and how you can kind of give yourself the best chance possible. That means you have to have some backup options and enough depth to overcome any early struggles, injuries, and that kind of stuff. But right now, the team is a little bit more on the lean side. And I'm happy that they haven't necessarily just wasted money and assets on players who are really not that good. But by the same token, they keep telling us they want to win games. So you're going to have to figure out how to bring in some upgrades to actually facilitate that. But it's not just Björck that I think, we're going to have to ask a lot of the other Jets youth that are kind of in this mix and conversation. There's going to be some big expectations that at least one or two of them reach NHL caliber heights. And I'm not sure that all of them are really prepared for that conversation. I want to talk about which guys I think have the best chance of doing so and how quickly it might happen. But, with what caveats each of those guys will come with as they try and compete for spots this coming preseason. We'll dive into all of that in just a moment. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as we're just closing out with some thoughts on Jets youth that might be able to make a real NHL impact this year. Some of these names we've talked about a handful of times, but I just want to say, like right off the bat, I think Björck really is the one, right? I think that's the guy that stands the best chance of moving the needle for the team. But I don't know that it's going to be a needle mover in year one. I think he could be, and he might help that Jets second line in particular, but the Jets still have a depth issue, and that's where a lot of the other kids need to come in and make an impact. Salomonson, I don't worry about. I know that his ceiling is probably going to be first pairing with Morrissey, so, once he's healthy, that's not really in question for me. I'm more concerned about the middle and bottom six. Right now it looks veteran heavy to me. The Jets have a lot of veteran contracts with some decent term on it, or at least decent cap hits, and loyalty to these guys. This is where I think the youth really need to make a case for themselves. Lambert has been one of those will they, won't they for, the past couple of years. And the thing with him is like his first Moose year really looked like he was primed for a upper echelon level of player for the Jets. And then the second year happened and he really stalled out. This is not too dissimilar what happened to him in Liga. And when you look at what happened with him in Liga, the teams he played for, especially Lati, they were really incompetently coached and managed. Obviously, that's not as bad here with the Jets, but we know that Winnipeg has also struggled with some of the same developmental issues and some questionable tactical awareness at the AHL level. Lambert needs something to give him confidence, and I think this year has to be the season that is the make or break if he sticks around. I would not be shocked if the Jets were to make a trade and Lambert was included in a package of some sort. I don't even know that he has that much value externally because his overall career up to this point has been a little bit underwhelming. But I also think that's reflective of A, how tough the NHL is, and B, Winnipeg's own struggles with graduating prospects to the NHL. For Lambert, I think playing up with the NHL club this year is going to be a lot healthier than being with the Moose. I think he also needs to be away from like just pure grindy players. I think you need guys with some level of offensive ability. Barron's probably one of the few in the bottom six that I think can realistically keep up with him. I really don't know what Lowry's going to be like this season, so that could be a little bit of a concern. But Jaeger might be one of the few that is also fighting for a spot that has a shot at being that kind of player that can keep up with Lambert. Brad is a little bit loose at times, know how some decision-making issues, especially when he's trying to make a really spectacular pass or play that might work at lower levels, but for the NHL is a little too risky. But we've also seen how explosive he can be. There's a version of him that is very good at getting the puck on goal, and he also has some of the better transition skating on this team, especially the potential to be a guy who, may not ever be a Nick Ehlers, but can at least carry the puck in a similar way. Jaeger, a little more oriented on the two-way side of things, and I don't know how much offense he's really going to bring to this team, but he could be one of the guys in the bottom six, especially towards the fourth line, that is a player the Jets ask to eat up some of those minutes. And honestly, if he could help kind of chew away some of the matchup minutes from Lowry, that might be even more helpful. I think asking Adam to be the shadow 2C again, like he's been in previous years, I think that might be too much. Adam's hips were a real problem last year. The rehab process generally takes like a whole year. And sure, he might be better now this coming season, but is he going to be at the level that he was when he was just pounding minutes and really driving the bus for the team behind Scheifele under Bones? I think that would probably be pretty unrealistic. So here we are faced with not a lot of young kids who can really step up. And, each of these kids has cosmetic flaws in their own way. The only other young player that I think really is going to make a name for himself is Roseanne. And I don't think the Jets yet see him as a guy that is a top sixer. He should be, in my mind. I think last year he showed some really interesting promise and a couple of really strong games late that I would put him up in the top six. I think you don't really have many other choices anyways that have his sort of upside. I think Roseanne is very good at getting the puck around the net. And yes, it didn't necessarily result in a lot of points for him last year, but I also think he didn't play enough games to make that sort of impact. I think the Jets need to put him away from the grinders, give him more of that skill to work with. And honestly, a Roseanne Björck Perfetti line could really, really cook. I would love to see something like that. Make a kids line, like use your youth in that way. We already know what the Jets vets are capable of and what they've accomplished at this level. And we also know that they are all aging, and that is not going to help them going forward. This team needs to try and figure out if these kids can be a bigger part of at least the immediate present. And if not, you're going to have to start coming up with some backup plans. I think there's only one other option for the team at that point, and it's not a door the Jets want to go down. They are unwilling to do it. They financially probably can't survive it, at least on paper in terms of operational costs, but I don't know what else they can do. They can keep kicking the can down the road for as long as possible, but even that is going to get harder and harder as some of the top players get older and older, and some of them get even a bit restless. If the Jets aren't winning a lot of games going forward, guys like Scheifele and Connor might rethink how committed they are to this team. So a lot to chew on. This is a very big transition year. And the Jets, again, will not want to look at it that way. They will keep talking about this like it is a playoff caliber season, a year that they're going to make the postseason and compete. But we know how that has gone the last couple of years, and we know that this team hasn't really improved this offseason beyond addition through subtraction and the Björck draft. Those pieces are really important, don't get me wrong, and this team will be better, but I don't know that it's going to be much better than it was last year. Curious to know your thoughts, though. Where do you see this team going? What do you think of their immediate future? Are you a little more impressed by the long-term picture, or do you feel it is bad? I'll say the long-term picture is not ideal without a lot more top young picks and talent, but that is kind of a bridge that the Jets are going to have to cross a little bit later. For the immediate present, you've got a number of draft picks who will probably be NHLers, even if they're not going to be high-end ones. But will that be enough? Maybe not. We'll continue to talk about the offseason on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, but for tonight's episode, that's all the time that we have. Thanks for listening. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets go.